Hello there, humans of his earthlings, whoever you are, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, and if you're lucky enough indeed to be doing it too. I'm Bushcon Blitz. Welcome back to channel. Indeed, if this is your first time here, aren't you a lucky ducky? Because you're going to see a little bit of well, this is a redo, I guess. This is the WZ121. I've never done a review on this tank before because they never called it the WZ before. It was the 121. Just plain old 102010. 11 was a racehorse, 22 was 12, 1111 race, 22112. There you go. The WZ121 is a tank that was pretty terrible. It's been buffed not long after release. Now, the way Wargaming lately has been going with tanks is they release them a little bit under the norm. They release them a little bit soft. How about the balls in that 121 right there, that Type 61? He could have been eviscerated from all over, but he still pushed over the top to get a shot on me and only got hit once. But, you know, good on him. This tank had the worst DPM in its tier. It had horrific gun depression and it had bad penetration. All those things combined to make it a tank that no one really wanted to drive, and so you saw bugger all 121s out there. Wargaming went and changed it. Now, I did a big review on the tank and I said just that. It was far too low on the totem pole. Basically, it has a 400 alpha gun. That's its one big trick. It has a 400 alpha 120mm gun. So if you're that keen on running a 120mm gun, you'd think it was a rarity. But no, there's like 1,000 tanks at tier 10 and most of them have over 120mm. Now, as a medium, 120mm gun is the only tank at tier 10 that has it, but there's like a whole arseload of tanks that have 350 alpha on 105mm guns, which is not that far off it. So the tank basically gave up gun depression, damage per minute, penetration, all this for a 50 alpha damage gun, which was like, you know, whatever, not that exciting. So Wargaming, in their wisdom, have looked at the numbers. They have a lot of numbers. They have numbers on numbers on numbers on numbers. When they balance, they don't do it off gut feeling. They balance it based on numbers. And this tank was underperforming. For those of you who want to pretend that it was a good tank, great. Apparently, it was a great tank that no one could get to work properly. And I don't know what else to tell you. So they went and buffed it. They buffed it a lot. And it's now fixed. It is not OP at all, but it is certainly capable of having good games. I'm going to show you, I had 4 games in this tank. I'm going to show you 3 of them. The second one was just fine. It was 2,850 damage. We lost a game on mines, but it was pretty boring because what I did was I went up the top of the hill on mines and guarded the entrance to mines. So it was basically a lot of me just sitting there waiting for a Leo 1 to come around the corner for 4 minutes and then doing 2,800 damage in the last 2 minutes. And it was a bit boring, to be honest. So I'm not going to show you that one. I'm just going to run you through these anyway, because I have done a full review on this tank before. So it's more about the changes and how the tank's gone and how it rolls now. The tank has always had reasonable armor for its tier. There's no getting around that. It's had reasonable armor for its tier. What it struggled with was the fact that it just couldn't output damage. And I mean, the thing people have really mentioned with this tank to me when they've tried to sell it to me and say, yeah, you can do damage is, well, you just can't brawl with it, or you just can't go front line with it, or you just can't, I like any tank in the game, and I've said this before, with the Toaster, with the Churchill gun carrier, with the 183, with anything, if you want to sit at the back and you want to just camp the back of the map and do damage, you don't need any particular tank to do that. You can do that in absolutely any tank. Anything with a modicum of gun handling and dispersion, that's the end of the mines map there, by the way. 2,853. Yeah. Can do that. You can do that in a 215B. You can do it in an E100. You can do it in a T110E5. The tank doesn't really matter when you get to that point. It's just the 120mm gun with decent dispersion. So if you're trying to sell me that that's the playstyle of the tank, I think you're out of your mind. This tank is now lovely for what it does. It can trade with heavies now. It has 3,000 DPM, which isn't over the top for the tier. It's still like 500 under the really big boys, but what it is enough to get up and angry in the face of other tanks. And I'm going to show you a game I have here on the lower part of Temple. Now, I'm using this game specifically in this position specifically because I've used this a lot of times in tanks like WZ-120s and stuff to illustrate the point that this is a great position if you can get it in there and you can get a 400 alpha gun there. But when you have such a low reload, a high reload time and such a low amount of DPM, you can't really make the most of it. And as you can see there, the gun is certainly nothing to write home about in terms of dispersion. The WZ-121 0.335 dispersion, absolutely fully buffed, and 245 millimeters of penetration. You run that up against tanks like, let's have a look at the M48A1 Patton, for instance. The M48A1 Patton, it has 0.326 dispersion and 250 millimeters of penetration, and it's also got like 9 degrees of gun depression, 8 degrees, no, actually the Patton's the king of gun depression in tier 10 mediums, isn't it? Everyone would like to think so. It has 9 degrees of gun depression as opposed to the 6 degrees in the WZ-121. And the reason that's so effective, having a little more gun depression, is it means you can always get your shots off, or you're far more likely to be in a situation where you can get your shots off, as opposed to the WZ-121 where you've got to kind of be low on the hill to get them off. And the reason I like positions like this on tanks without gun depression but with fairly strong Soviet hulls and turrets is you don't have to worry about gun depression. Everything's flat or above you, which is great. So you're basically sliding around this corner, angling up your upper glacis as hard as you can, and then putting shots in and pulling back. Awesome, right? And there's a 215B 183 bouncing AP off the top of my tank. Just resetting my ammo. We cleared that AMX 50B, and I'm looking for a little bit more 215B 183 action. Red's going to make a pretty spirited comeback here, which is very solid. Otto from Oxo, I've seen Otto around for years. Very good player in the Waffle Tractor. He's quite capable over there. There's that 183. Would love to clear him. He's fired, so, you know, we've got a little bit of time to get another one into him. And this is something which previously wouldn't have been possible. They took basically 2 seconds, they took 2 seconds off the reload time of this tank. That's a monumentally large amount. Right now we'd be at about 10 seconds reload. That 2 seconds doesn't just mean that you get more DPM. It's all about the fact that you can get shots off and maybe get 2 off instead of 1 in situations against a 183 and other tanks. It's so important. That tiny little bit at the top of the tree makes all the difference. Those numbers, the tiniest margins, they just make such a massive amount of difference. The other thing that I'm really stoked with on this gun and on this tank is they gave it an extra degree of gun depression. 5 degrees was brutal. It was brutal. Not only did it have horrible gun depression, it had no DPM, so it had no punch, and it had to work extra hard compared to all the other mediums in its tier, apart from, say, T62A, to get that gun into the game. And you can see here, I'm just waiting on shots on that 183. Then we're dropping adrenaline. Now, he doesn't have gun depression as well, and that's what I mean. Gun depression is so important. He had to climb over the top of that hill to get the shots off. I didn't. Now 122mm is 121mm. Look, just HE. When you've got a big gun, this is when it starts counting. These are the situations where big guns really, really help. And I'm saying ahoy Otto, because he doesn't know who I am, because I'm player _89, whatever. And here comes the Jaegeru. Awesome. And we're going to roll forward and do the business. And you can see now that it's got a spot on the battlefield. It's got a position on the battlefield where it can be successful. It's a big alpha medium tank with just enough DPM that it can get pushed on and still output damage by anyone and not just get absolutely shellacked. Like you had the same kind of DPM as a mouse before. So no one was afraid to get in your face and push on you. 4310, excellent stuff. Love it, can't get enough of it. Next game, please, Maestro, roll this one on. And we've got a game on mines. And I'm just going to show you there. It's the final game. And more or less, I just want to talk a little bit about the way the game's played at the moment. There's a huge prevalence towards high alpha TD tanks at tier 10. It just is. Like, there's so much of it. And Wargaming is obviously trying to balance that out. And you can see there, we've got 183s, 268, 268. 268 on our side, an Object 263, which is obviously a massive DPM, YOLO wagon. You see a lot of this, right? There's so much alpha over there. So DPM isn't everything, but DPM meaning damage per minute. It's not everything. But the problem with a tank that doesn't have DPM is it's got to do something better. And this tank didn't have enough of a sting. I would have thought that the buff process for this tank would have been either keep the DPM where it was, but give it a bigger alpha damage strike, or obviously buff the DPM up and just live with it as kind of like a high alpha hybrid T62 / E50M, because it doesn't have the laser beam, but it's certainly got a good armor profile like a T62 and everything, but it doesn't have the massive DPM of a 62A. It's just its own tank now, and that's special. And it can perform at this tier because 400 alpha, when you're pumping it out often enough, does make a big difference. And before, if you wanted to get a high alpha, a really high alpha gun, you'd run an FV4202, which is another tank I'm going to be doing a video on very soon, because it got buffed as well. It's almost like all the things that I was really hoping Wargaming would do with these tier 10 tanks, they've bloody well gone and done. I wanted them to buff the T110E3. I wanted the FV4202 to get its rate of fire back and its HESH guns and its... I mean, they've really been paying attention and running the numbers and making things work at this tier over the last couple of patches. Look at that 500 alpha on a max roll there. That's a real game breaker. That's a real difference maker. And 8 seconds later, you're ready to go again. It means people can't ignore you. If I was against this tank previously, and I say in an IS-7, I'd push into it. There'd be no problems pushing into it, because it just wouldn't have the wherewithal to put the damage back. And this is my fault there. I get my angles wrong, and I just push out too far. But now, even though you are one of the worst damage per minute numbers for a medium of its tier, it's got enough of a sting that people can't just take you for granted. People can't just ignore you. If you watch tournaments, they'll ignore the mouse. Like, the last thing you want to be shooting is the mouse. It's got a great armor profile, but it's got no DPM. And this was like the mouse of mediums. It had a reasonable armor profile, but you could just ignore it and let it do a bit of damage during the game. And it's like ignoring someone that's really, really good on the opposition team, and you're like making the rest of the team beat you, because this tank, quite simply put, couldn't carry on its own. And now that's not the case. Now it's got the tools to be successful. It's got that extra degree of gun depression, which is 20% more gun depression than it used to have. It's now got Object 140 levels of gun depression, as opposed to T54, T62A levels of gun depression. I think, honest to God, the next tank that's going to get buffed is the WZ-120. The Tier 9 variant of this tank sucks absolute nuts. I would not wish it on my worst enemy. Anyway, that's the WZ-121. They fixed the T110E3. They fixed this thing too. I'm going to be doing some videos on the Cent 701 and the 4202 very, very shortly to talk about the renaissance in those tanks, but rest assured, I'm very happy with where they've gone as well. All in all, it's been a good patch. I'm Bushcron Blitz. Thanks very, very much for watching. Look after yourselves and stay safe on the battlefield.